everyone's saying these growth numbers at the AI companies were super hard to even like predict or whether or not these are even real. Well, you know what, John? These wild growth numbers are real. Anthropic has put out more annualized revenue numbers that just topped 4 billion, up from 1 billion at the start of the year. And OpenAI has surged to $10 billion run rate. May have lost a couple of their key hires over to Facebook for $300 million signing bonuses, but nevertheless, this is a crazy amount of growth that we're seeing, and it's happening across all different levels. So I got to say, like, nobody would have thought they were going to hit these revenue numbers, and they sure beat them out of the park.
I'm just stunned on how huge it is, the tax cuts that are in there, and yet you go and piss around with these small little cuts to the USAID program, and like it just is nonsensical. The one that was so bizarre in the clause in there was that, remember that Section 899 clause where they would put massive withholding taxes. It's like, dudes, that makes no sense. You're basically encouraging a flight of capital away from the United States, and they're going to be borrowing astronomical amounts to fund this.
All right, John, welcome back to the tank here. Obviously, something that you had been calling for a while just got axed, and we are talking about the digital services tax has been rescinded. Canada halted its 3% digital service tax just hours before the June 30th collection date to clear the way for U.S. trade talks, something that you obviously definitely thought was a pretty stupid idea, as well as the rest of Canada, as Prime Minister Mark Carney and President Trump have agreed to resume talks aiming to finalize a comprehensive economic and security deal by July 21st. So obviously this DST, kind of goes back into the 2020 time period and was really created as a stopgap, for preventing multinational tech companies essentially from leveraging a lot of the content as well as benefiting from revenue from Canadian users.
Right.
What were your thoughts around this? I mean, was this not the easiest thing to see that they were going to scrap right away when it was ready to get pushed through?
Well, I thought it was just bad public policy in the first point. Like number one, remember there was two different bills, one dealing with the DST, the digital service tax, and the other one dealing about, the ability to pay Canadian news sources for distribution on your platform. But let's just talk about the DST. It was really a proxy for, in the digital services world, the problem is when you don't have what's called a permanent establishment, or you don't have a corporation which is capturing the revenues fully, Canada, the Canadian consumer pays a lot of money for this, and yet no taxation really falls, or very little taxation falls into Canadian hands. And I get the point. Now, first of all, it's a transfer pricing issue, so there's a way to deal with it currently under current legislation, under transfer pricing. But the part that really bugs me, the 5 years beforehand, who was their biggest customers in Canada? The Canadian government, almost all of them, not all of them, but, Google, Google in particular, Amazon, etc. We were bending over backwards to support them with everything that they wanted. And then we say, holy cow, you gotten big. Like, no shit, Sherlock. But the problem with the DST is that there is a convention on how you tax companies on a global perspective. And it really needs to be based on profits generated. This was on revenues. So what is this really? It's really a tariff. And the thing that I found rather ironic is that the same pundits in Canada that were complaining with the audacity of tariffs by the U.S., which correctly stated, were like, well, what's wrong when we do it? Well, dudes, if you're negotiating, you're thumbing them in the eye with one and you're begging them to lay off on the other one. The thing that I was, complaining a little bit about, or a lot about, was, yes, it was a bad tax to start off with. And yes, a year ago, Matt, I was pushing to get rid of this because I knew down the line it was going to be an issue. And remember, Biden, when he was in power, said, hey, this is really bad stuff. And you're following the few of the European countries who have more leverage than we do because they trade less. The part of the problem that we caused, though, is that we did this in the 11th hour, 59th minute. The optics weren't
Exactly.
Carney did the right thing, but the optics made it look like he bent over backwards. I don't think that was the case, but boy, people are very, very upset that, it wasn't elbows up on this. And so that's where I think they stepped in it, and they probably should have killed that. Or maybe what I would have done, I would have said, guys, don't worry. It's off the table. Well, we got to negotiate the other stuff, but it's off the table. We get it. We don't like tariffs at all. But to completely get it off the table right now at this time, I probably wouldn't have done it in the same way, but the result is the right result. And let's just hope that we get something for this, because it would be a shame if Trump then comes with the next thing. And
you just handed him another quick win when you could have optically made it look way different instead of waiting to the last minute to get rid of it when you always had the plan to get rid of it. Yeah. And granted, the media is just eating this up here. But, we got some of these numbers out of the May economic data, the trade shortfalls, the U.S. tariff biting, some of our major industries like steel, aluminum. Did you see the non-U.S. markets shipments outside of the U.S., how high they jumped in May in Canada? So the non-U.S. Shipments jumped 5.7% to a record high, led by a 15.1% rise in mineral products and a 30% surge in gold exports to the UK. So we are definitely trying to get more of our exports in. Yeah. We're trying to get more of our exports out from the U.S. market, obviously overseas. The trade deficit fell to $5.9 billion, down from $7.6 billion in April, obviously coming through in the summer months as well. But, listen, the U.S. tariffs are still taking a bite out of steel, aluminum, and obviously auto levies. So we need to figure out a trade agreement very quickly here, right?
Yeah, I think so. And again, who knows? I'm not party to any of these discussions, but like I've said to you, I would be very surprised if it ended up with zero tariffs. I still believe that it's going to end up at around 10%, which is what I started off on this whole thing saying that if the U.S. started off at 10%, we probably would have just simply acquiesced and said, it sucks, but you know what? 10 we can deal with. And so I'm going to believe that we're going to end up in the exact same starting point that we should have months ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Switching gears here, John, something you and I have talked a lot about, but when we see someone like Brookfield do it, we know this is starting to shape up to be the future. Did you see Brookfield's announcing their new open-ended private equity evergreen fund later this year?
I saw that.
For those listeners who don't know, evergreen funds essentially allow wealthy investors to buy in or cash out early at any time, usually on structured periods every month or every quarter or so. But when Brookfield puts their name up for building more evergreen funds, you know that this is something that people are obviously going to take shape of. In conjunction with that, they sold a total of $690 million in 3 portfolio companies, freeing up some cash, as probably liquidity is something they're looking to roll into the new evergreen fund structure. But I guess the question for you, John, is do you think launching an evergreen fund for high net worth investors basically kind of dilutes some of the other product offerings that Brookfield has as its core, institutional products? Is it cannibalistic?
Yeah, I don't know, because I would have thought that it's really attracting a different type of an investor that they were otherwise not getting. They did make mention over a year ago that, and it's not only Brookfield, but a few of the very large ones, was feeling that they were capping out with sourcing institutional capital, and yet trillions were in people's IRA accounts or RSPs, et cetera. So I think that this is a way for them to tap into that, and the liquidity option, is a way. Now, it could work to some extent on buyout, but when you start going to growth or venture, which some folks are doing now, it becomes a much harder challenge on marking the value of these things.
Not only the marking the value, John, you and I both know liquidity is a blessing and a curse, though, when it comes to these structures of funds, right? Brookfield manages over $1 trillion US in assets, with about 150 billion in its private equity arm across industrials, business services, financial infrastructure, and healthcare. But to have liquidity available at certain windows when potentially, a market starts to fall out and there's a rush, those things really go against you. So I know they obviously think about these things. We're not the only ones who talk about it, but that is the curse about liquidity windows.
The curse.
And when you have a 10-year lockup in a closed-end fund like we have at both Mavericks and Ripple, you kind of have the benefit of not worrying if there's going to be a massive drawdown on your assets when you're in line to do a transformative, healthcare acquisition or something of that nature. So it's really it definitely could impact the strategy a bit, maybe not completely from versus what their traditional private closed-end funds do. But you're right. This probably doesn't open up a massive $1 trillion, asset pool inside of like RIAs and wealth management platforms that they weren't able to access before by adding in this liquidity feature, right?
Yeah. And it's not a forced liquidity either, right? They will say, typically, this is how much liquidity is in this quarter. So you've got X number of days to let us know. But if the requests for redemption are greater than the amount of liquidity, it's not like they have to go out and borrow to make the redemptions. But you're absolutely right. It goes really well in good times, and in bad times, it could really throttle the fund.
Yeah. Speaking of liquidity, John, I feel like obviously people are talking about crypto and stable coins, but the other thing I'm starting to see talk a lot about is like the resurgence of like the new generation banking. And how open banking, yes, is something we talk about here in Canada, but in the U.S., we had a new bank that just launched. It's pronounced Erebor, I believe, which was a consortium led by Palmer Luckey from Anduril, the backing from Joe Lonsdale from 8VC and his old partner, Peter Thiel from Founders Fund. They filed for a U.S. national bank charter, basically to create a digital-only lender targeting startups and crypto firms. But between this sort of announcement and obviously what's happening with Circle and stable coins and, what we see with Anthony Lacavera and Bryce Shepchick doing, with their digital first bank, I feel like there's going to be this big change happening in the financial services industry over the next 5 to 10 years. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are, what you're seeing out there, because now there's like real push to get more, stablecoin, regulation obviously passing in the US is helping a huge rush into the industry. We're seeing it happening in the US. Do you think this will happen in Canada?
Well, so you have the United States, and largely because of Trump and, Trump taking advantage of it and the people that's surrounding him. And it's really opening it up. But in Canada, do you see that Canada is following the, what's the central banker organization that just did that white paper or that thought paper maybe about a week ago talking about the risks of a stable coin? And it was interesting. They went the other way, and it's largely European central bankers. But, they started talking about, the lack of control, the safeguards, etc. But it really is about control. And
of course it is their control.
It feels just like the whole AI discussion. The U.S. is going unfettered capitalism, which certainly has its risks and challenges. And the EU and Canada is following more so. The EU now going, wait a minute, we'll follow the regulatory front. I think it's going to end up being, again, just like AI, even though Europe wanted to regulate the crap out of it, they started getting the pressure that they were going to lose out from an innovation perspective. I think the same thing is going to happen as it relates to the crypto broadly, whether it's stable coins or other technologies.
I mean, listen, John, we all know that central bankers have their own agenda that they may speak about privately versus publicly. But I hear what you're saying. The erosion of monetary sovereignty is something that people talk about, right? Private stable coins can dilute a central bank's control over money supply and currency issuance. If people treat USDC and Tether or something as money, it undercuts national currencies. Totally get it. Right. You've got the risk and financial instability of bank runs, sharp redemptions on large stablecoins can trigger fire sales.
Interest rate setting policies.
Obviously, liquidity swap lines and capital flight from emerging markets. I get all those central bank concerns, but the cat's already out of the bag. This is what the people want, and this is what the people have been craving for, which is speed, lower transaction costs, and the ability to see things in real time and not have the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain charging us fees and telling us how everything works behind the scenes, but just not really sure how it goes across different channels.
Right.
And it just shows up on a screen in your iPhone that this is how much money just got transferred to your account, but not knowing how much left in the middleman between everything. So that is what I think is happening here. And I think, if anything, I've learned that Peter Thiel, when he puts his mind to sort something, he's thought many, many moves ahead than probably a central banker has. So let's see. But I just hope that the Canadian banks do not sit idly by, because somebody like a Wealthsimple or Anthony and the team there are going to figure this out much faster, and they're going to adopt it just the same way as the U.S. guys are doing it here. I got to get your take on this big, beautiful bill, because it's coming to the finish line here. By the time this episode launches, it's probably already going to be approved by the July 4th deadline that Trump put in, but it is massive.
Yeah.
Just to give, it's about a 940-page bill. The total price tag, $4.5 trillion, okay, in a sweeping tax and spending package, clocking in at about $4.5 trillion over the coming years. The deficit, $3.3 trillion, is what they're going to be adding to the federal deficit through 2034. The debt ceiling is going to be bumped to $4 trillion. And the reconciliation vehicle basically, you can't filibuster in the Senate. Basically, it just needs a simple majority to pass. So what are your thoughts on this big, beautiful bill?
Wow.
It's gargantuan.
Yeah, I have to agree with Elon Musk on this. Did you see his latest tweet?
Do you think it's going to be an American party? It's not a terrible idea.
The result of it. Oh, yes, that's right. That's what he just tweeted. Yeah, I was pointing to the tweet that he did, was showing the graph.
Oh yeah, of
the
course.
Spike on the deficit. Yeah. It is shocking how that discussion is not even being had in U.S. circles. Like if that party is over, my God, and it is contrary to what I thought was going to happen in the United States. I'm just stunned on how huge it is, the tax cuts that are in there, and yet you go and piss around with these small little cuts to the USAID program, and it just is nonsensical. The one that was so bizarre in the clause in there was remember that Section 899 clause where they would put massive withholding taxes. It's like, dudes, that makes no sense. You're basically encouraging a flight of capital away from the United States, and they're going to be borrowing astronomical amounts to fund this. How do the two work together? I just did not understand.
Yeah. What you're talking about is Section 899 is referred to as the revenge tax.
Right.
And basically it imposes a new U.S. withholding tax on payments to foreign investors or companies based in offending countries, basically those that levy what the U.S. deems discriminatory taxes on American firms. I.e. the digital services tax.
Canada.
Right.
And includes, pension funds that were exempt from investments in the United States.
Right. So the House had it at 20% and the Senate pushed it to 15%. But it's important. There's a lot of stuff in here. Thank God for AI to go through all that stuff. John, I want to switch gears here because we got another S1 filing that you and I chatted about. With Figma. It's pretty impressive. Basically Figma, for people who don't know, is a collaboration design tool that took over a ton of people in the startup world and even in enterprise versions for the last, 5-7 years. Company is well known for being backed early by Sequoia, but not having any revenue for the first 4 years. It's a case study that we all follow very closely about product-led growth and product market fit before actually generating any revenue. But the company's been on a tear. It plans to list Common A shares in ticker FIG, led by Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs. 2024 revenue, $750 million, up almost 50%. Q1 25 growth is $228 million, up 50 or 46%. They are extremely high on the gross margin, 91% on rolling revenue. about 13 million users, and they have 90% of Fortune 500 companies using Figma. Now, the great thing about this is that they have a negative net burn because of the $1 billion termination fee they got when Adobe's $20 billion bid fell through. Now, there was one post, though, that somebody nitpicked on that I got to make sure I call out. So this guy, David Spitz, basically applauding Figma for their overall S1 numbers, top-notch performance. Yeah. But one thing he called out that was just simply wrong, and I actually agree with him, was their net revenue retention definition. Did you see this?
I was going to say, wasn't like 130%? Was it an astronomical?
Okay. Yeah, they report 132% net revenue retention.
Yeah.
But instead of starting with last year's customers and measuring their expansion, Figma started with today's date of over 10,000 ARR customers and looked backwards, which basically skipped the churned accounts.
Oh, that's absolutely inappropriate to do it that way.
And this is in their definition that he found, and it was pretty interesting. The other thing they did was on gross revenue retention leaves out downsells. Their 96% gross revenue retention only counts fully churned customers, ignoring those who cut spend but stayed on. Most people include both of those. So your true gross revenue retention would be noticeably lower. He's basically saying this is a misleading definition that masks the real retention issues inside of Figma. Even if Figma's metrics are still, top notch, it's just something that people should have like a straight line across. And he's basically saying like, this is a penalty box moment, but everything else is amazing. The product is great. The business is great. But like, why would you call this out in your S1 filing?
You know what's funny? When you were going through all those things, I was going to say to you, but by the way, the figure that I'm blown away, the 130%. That blew me away. And now you're telling me it was full of shit.
A little too good to be true there, John. And the last thing I got to bring up to you, okay, so everyone's saying these growth numbers at the AI companies were super hard to even like predict or whether or not these are even real. Well, you know what, John? These wild growth numbers are real. Anthropic has put out more annualized revenue numbers that just topped 4 billion, up from 1 billion at the start of the year. And OpenAI has surged to $10 billion run rate. May have lost a couple of their key hires over to Facebook for $300 million signing bonuses. But nevertheless, this is a crazy amount of growth that we're seeing, and it's happening across all different levels. So I got to say, like, nobody would have thought they were going to hit these revenue numbers, and they sure beat them out of the park.
Did their burn go up at the same rate, or
they're still burning a boatload of cash for sure to hit this scale? And the big question is whether or not the real long-term value will land, or where the raw model layer, or is it in the apps layer and the features, like where this all goes. But at the end of the day, these numbers are still hitting their mark, which is quite astronomical. But what were your thoughts on the Facebook Meta talent acquisition war?
I think it smells of massive desperation that, you have Zuck believing in the metaverse, wanted to be the first, does a face plant on there, goes nowhere on their AI strategy, and now is just offering up massive boatloads of prices, not only to move in, in a positive direction, but perhaps to destabilize the competition as well. But I think these are not good developments to be paying these baseball contracts, for individuals that, again, if you're listening to Sam Altman, said that was deep down in the organization. But who knows? I
don't know. I mean, Sam may be saving face here. Those are pretty big names that sound like he created or recruited for their Meta Superintelligence labs. Basically, he got the guy who created the O series models, Tripit Bensal. He got the guys who worked on the multimodal AI models, ChatGPT's 4.0 voice mode. He got the guy who led post-training at OpenAI, co-creator of ChatGPT. Like, these are pretty big heavy hitters he was able to recruit, and good for him. I mean, he's spending, I don't know, $15 billion for 50% stake or so for Scale AI. He put out massive packages suggesting as high as 100 million per researcher. But Meta's saying that's not true, saying it's exaggerated. And then some credible reports are saying offers are up to 300 million over 4 or 5 years. So who knows where the real numbers and signing bonuses led. They're big numbers. But when you look at it compared to their market cap and what they have to lose by not doing something like this, you got to give them credit for taking a big shot. because they have a lot to lose if this does not go in the direction they need it to be, where they basically are still subjected to another platform that owns all the economics and all the screen time and consumption time from their user base.
Yeah, but it felt like he hasn't known. That's what I'm saying. Is it FOMO as well that you are so
total FOMO? Total FOMO.
Let me ask you a related question. Microsoft just laid off, 9,000 people?
Less than 4% of the workforce.
Okay. But do you believe that's by virtue of their efficiencies that they're gaining from AI adoption? Or do you think that they're watching out on the amount of their burn so that they have as much investment capital available in order to compete from an AI?
I think AI obviously is the headline people are going to say is at fault here for those people unfortunately laid off. But I think it's just more redundancy. I think there's probably roles in that organization that were mostly analytical or like very low service-based stuff. They said there was a lot of middle managers as well, but like they probably looked over this and they said, this is the right size organization that we need for the future of the company. And these are the roles that we no longer need because software has totally made these, jobs redundant. And I totally understand that. I think AI is definitely a part of it, but how about all the value they're going to be creating by allowing people either lower in the organization to move up into those roles faster, or the fact that there's going to be people that are going to get better access to tools because they're not being blocked by middle managers who have just to defend their job for existence in the first place.
Maybe, but also let me play a little bit of a cynic on here. If you're betting your entire future on the AI adoption of your products that you're going to sell to other customers, it's a hell of a story to say, hey, it is so powerful that, look at all the savings that we're generating from it. So can you imagine you when we sell it to you? So,
I think their cost. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. It's kind of like the McKinsey example. McKinsey fires 10% of their workforce, but still wants to justify the $6 to $8 million price tags for their consulting engagements. I think that's going to change a lot. I think what they're going to say is, okay, we now have a lot of software that can do a lot of the work for us. We're going to take less amount of human labor to do more lower ACV projects across a higher volume of projects. And you're going to benefit because it's a cheaper cost for you to work with us because we don't have many bodies on every project. And the partners don't need as many younger staff or analysts working alongside them on every mandate that they take on. So maybe it's a win-win possibility too, John.
Yeah, no, maybe, but I'm just, I put the cynic hat on me that the only thing that you should be saying is it's being caused by AI because you're in the business of selling that to other folks.
So don't try to hide it.
Yeah, like
I hear your point.
Yeah, like because I think it's still too early.
Eat your own dog food and tell the honest truth about how you're benefiting from it, so other people can do the same. I hear you.
Right. That's
fair enough.
That's what
fair enough. All right, John. Well, until next time. Thanks again for jumping in the tank.
Thanks, Matt.